Our lesson today, upon which we'll build our thoughts about faith and practice, come from the Gospel of John, chapter 2, verses 13 through 22. This is a familiar story to most everybody. It's a story we find in all four of the Gospels, and you can't say that about every incident in Jesus' life. Uh, to make it in all four is really to say this is an important story. It is the cleansing of the temple. And I'm assuming that most of us have heard of it. That's where Jesus goes into the temple and takes a whip in his hand and knocks over the tables of money changers and unpens the animals that are there being sold for sacrifice, drives them out and just makes a general commotion of everything. It's quite a dramatic moment for Jesus. We tend to think of him as meek and mild or more profoundly always in control, understanding beyond everyone else's understanding. He has a sense of comprehensiveness that just gives him a studied cool. That's our normal feeling about Jesus, but this one is just unbridled anger. It just stands out. It's so exceptional to what we expect of Jesus. Well, I'd like to work through the Gospel of John story because in looking at it piece by piece, I think it'll give us not only a better appreciation for the story itself, but also for why he was doing it. What is Jesus trying to reveal in this action? Because he doesn't do things impulsively. Whatever Jesus does, he does as a learning moment to teach us something important. And he is teaching us something important. And what is it? What is it he's trying to get us to see, to comprehend, to embrace? What is it? Well, let's find out. Beginning at verse 13 in chapter 2, the Passover of the Jews was near. Now, Passover was the big feast that Jews came to every year. And little Jerusalem, which is a very modest city in size, would swell to 100,000 people with all these Jews who came from all over the Middle East to be there for the event. So the temple was the only temple there was. There were no other temples out there for the Jews. There's only one in Jerusalem, so they all kind of came home and celebrated this core ritual that was so important to them as a people. The lambs would be sacrificed, and then they would eat the lamb. They would roast it and eat it as part of the Seder meal, which is still practiced by Jews today. It is the thing that sort of unites Jews no matter where they are. When it comes to Passover, they all have the Seder, S-E-D-E-R. And Jesus went up to Jerusalem at this point. In the temple, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Now, this was to be expected because people traveling all that way couldn't bring their own animals for sacrifice with them, so they would purchase the animals that had been raised locally. It was good for the economy. Raise the animals there, they would be sacrificed and then in turn cooked and eaten. And the money changers were there because currencies from all over the Middle East were there, and people would come and get their particular currency exchanged for the Jewish currency. Those money changers are still there today, by the way. We took a trip to the Middle East in 1995, and you could go to the kiosk in the airport where the banks would officially do your money changing, or you could find these guys out in the street. Literally, they had these long coats on. They opened up the coats, and they had all these kinds of currency. And we could exchange, and did. We exchanged our dollars for Jewish shekels. So it's still a real thing. So the animals and the money changers are actually there as a service to the pilgrims who came to celebrate the Passover. So in their eyes, this was a legitimate activity, but not in the eyes of Jesus. Here we go. making a whip of cords. He drove all of them out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned the tables. And he told those who were selling the doves, take those things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace. This is a temple of God, not a Walmart. Come on. His disciples remembered, it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. That's a quote from Psalm 69. Well, this incident, of course, was deeply disturbing to all who saw it, especially the leadership of the Jews. This was desecration. It's like spraying graffiti in the sanctuary of your home church. It's just awful. Don't do this. And so they were definitely riled. Now, the Jews then said to him, what sign can you show us for doing this? It sounds remarkably placid, almost sounds like a philosophical debate, but believe me, there was deep anger and offense behind it, and a sign. What sign from God can you show to validate what you have done? Because if you cannot show a sign from God, buddy, you are in trouble. What sign can you show? And Jesus answered, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. This temple, being a magnificent building, 60-acre complex, is huge. The Temple Mount is still there today. You can see it. The famous Wailing Wall, where people go to pray and they put their prayers on paper and stuff them in the cracks, that's part of the foundation walls. Huge stone blocks that were created. King Herod really had a building program that went for about 50, 60 years to build this magnificent temple in Jerusalem. It was a sight to behold. It was destroyed by the Romans in the later part, around 80 AD or so, 70, 80 AD. But it was a magnificent building. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. That's what he said. The Jews then said, this temple's been under construction for 46 years, and you will raise it up in 3 days? They were asking a legitimate question. But as is so true in Jesus' speak, he's talking symbolically. There's a code in here. But he was speaking about the temple of his body. Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. The hardest thing for the disciples to understand, and really the hardest thing for, I think, any Christian to understand, is that this dynamic, this death and this resurrection piece is so different from the way we view the world. And yet, if we are to come to terms with understanding God, understanding Jesus, understanding the uniqueness of Christian faith and thinking, we need, like the disciples, to come to terms with it. This is the very heart of what the faith is about. And I believe that's probably my sermon today. This is the heart of our faith. And when we embrace it, we are changed. We are changed in our outlook, in our self-perception, in how we understand God. All of this changes when we understand and embrace the death and the resurrection of Jesus. I think that's why Lent has always been such an important season in the church's life. It's been around for literally centuries, from the very earliest days of the church. And it's a time of preparation to get ourselves ready for the events of Holy Week, because that is the very heart of our story. It is Holy Week, and especially Good Friday and Easter Sunday, that make the faith unique, make the faith what it is. Christians who come to terms with this are the luckiest Christians, the most fortunate ones, because they're really catching on to what Jesus is about. Now think about it. Why are people Christian? Why do they become part of a church? Why do they embrace the Christian faith? There are lots of reasons. And as a pastor, I've heard so many over the years, and you can roughly categorize them. There are the very general reasons, such as I was always raised a Christian, and that's my family's tradition, and I'm Christian in outlook, so that's who I am. I'm Christian, generally speaking. A little more narrowly focused, but still very broad, are people who become Christian because they find a church they like, a community of people who are friendly and welcoming, and who doesn't want to be welcomed, who doesn't want to be included. And you find your friends there. And so a lot of folks, for them, the Christianity is the friendships they have in church. And that's fine. But, it's not unique to the Christian faith. There are lots of groups out there where people are friendly and inclusive. There are people who are part of like gun clubs where, they find a lot of fellowship in shooting at targets. There are folks who are hikers. They enjoy hiking together. There are cooking groups that enjoy cooking together. So, there's all kinds of affinity groups out there where people feel included. So the church is not necessarily unique, but this is why some people become Christian, because they find a church that loves them. This is not bad, but it's still not quite getting to the core energy of the faith. Well, there are those who say, well, I like Christianity because it provides a structured way of living, because it's so comprehensive. It's like a very sort of like from birth to death and even after death kind of way of looking at things. And this is getting closer, because Christianity really is a comprehensive life. So many of the issues of life are dealt with in Christian thinking and teaching. The morality is certainly expressed in the Ten Commandments. It's a basis of how we live our lives. We heard the Ten Commandments earlier in our service today. The Ten Commandments are an ethical and an expression of God's will for us. So we have that, and that's a good thing. Christianity talks about respect for God. It talks about respect for neighbors. It's a very nice way and a healthy way to look at God and to look at each other and to look at ourselves. So they like that moral aspect. In fact, in the early days of the church, Jewish synagogues attracted people who were called God-fearers. These were Gentiles. These were non-Jews who didn't quite want to become Jews, because that's kind of complicated. But they liked what the Jews are saying. They liked their sense of community and their sense of right and wrong, and they liked the sense of moral values they had. And so many people are attracted to the Christian church because they like its ethics. They like its morality. And again, this is good. But then, other religious systems are also very comprehensive. If you look at Islam, Judaism, Buddhism. These are pretty much dealing with the same life issues and coming up with their own unique answers about what's right and true. So Christianity is not unique in that it has an ethical core. Well, some would say, well, I think it's unique because of Jesus Christ. You have a person. And I am a Christian because I can relate to the person of Jesus. He not only attracts me, he teaches me, he inspires me. And I don't understand everything about him, but I want to get to know him better. He's a figure to whom I can relate. And that's great because that is a very powerful part of the Christian faith. We do have Jesus. But even so, we're not the only ones to have a central figure. It is Islam that has Muhammad. Buddhism has Buddha. Judaism has Moses. So all of these other three have their central figures too that people can relate to. What is it that Christian faith has that the others do not? At the very heart is this death and resurrection of Jesus. The Buddha, Moses, Muhammad, they all died. None in their faith were resurrected. Christianity uniquely asserts that its leader, who represents a very comprehensive kind of way of living life, their leader died and was raised from death. And the sooner we come to embrace that and to appropriate that and to understand it, the sooner we will be touched by it, shaped by it, changed by it. Let me give two examples of what this change is like when somebody really catches on to the death and resurrection of Jesus. Something happens. It is not unlike a woman who gives birth for the first time. We had a group at our church that I served for many years called Mothers of Preschoolers. And this was a Mother's Day Out kind of program where the church members provided childcare for the morning and the moms had a chance to get together and, catch up on things and network, but also have a program that helped foster mothering in some way. It was kind of a teaching program as well. And one of the expressions that was a motto, really, for that program was, when a baby is born, so also a mother. I like that. Because a woman who's expecting a child and expecting to be a mother, once the child comes and the birth has happened, there is a change that takes place. She's no longer thinking about being a mom, she is. And that will change her life forever. In the deepest ways. There will be joys and there will be sorrows. There will be heartbreak and there will be ecstasy. It is a dynamic, powerful experience, and there's definitely a before and an after. There's a change that takes place. Coming close to the death and the resurrection of Jesus brings about that same kind of change in a believer. We can talk about the fellowship, we can talk about the ethics, we can talk about the pleasantness of Christianity, we can talk about how how wonderful our religion it is. But it's when we come to the core of it, appreciating the death and the resurrection of Jesus and what that means, when that catches, we are changed. We are altered. Like a woman who is expecting a child to a mom who has a child. Another story, and I know I'm running a little long here, but please indulge me in one more story. From a man's point of view, there's a dynamic in, I think, every man that, it's fun to be a boy, but there comes a time to be a man. And how do you know you're a man? How do you know you've moved from being the child to a man? And of course, there's lots of little ways to do it. And one of the things we did was the scouting program. My son was a scout, and there was not much I could do to help, but there was one thing I could do in helping him grow, and that was I helped with a merit badge. They have a cycling merit badge where the kids learn about their bikes, how to take care of them, and then we do like bike hikes. And the supreme part, the most challenging part of the merit badge was to go on a 50-mile hike. This is like huge for these kids. They've never been 50 miles on a bicycle, and you do it in one day. And I remember I had a group of boys, my son being one of them, who were all part of this, and we took our time. We didn't kill ourselves, but my son was going through a challenge because he had this fear of aching muscles. It scared him when his body hurt, and it made him cry, and it made him so afraid of extending himself. I remember and this is an issue that I knew was there. He had expressed this many times. And I remember we got to a point, though, in the bike hike where it was 43 miles, 7 miles to go. And he had it. He was tired. He was miserable. His body hurt. And he was just weepy, and he just didn't want to go on. And he said, 43 is close enough to 50. And not in my calculations. I said, no, Tim, we got to do the 50. No, we don't. Yeah, we do. Well, I quit. And he took his bike and he threw it in the ditch and stood there. Well, I knew that the other boys were going down the road. They weren't complaining. And I was pretty sure they could make it. And I was pretty sure he could make it too. But what did I do? Well, I went off to catch up to them because I knew we were going to come back anyhow. It wasn't going to be long before we'd circle back and we could pick him up and maybe he'd feel a little better. So I caught up to the boys and we went down toward the end of the road where we were going to turn around. And suddenly we heard this noise behind us. This, and we looked around and it was my son. And Tim was absolutely stone-faced, looking ahead, did not look at any of us. And he just barreled his way through us and went down to the end of the road, turned around and came back with just that same intensity. And suddenly we all picked up our pace to go down and catch up to him. And he finished the day. He made his 50 miles. He learned that day that pain is inconvenient, but it's not a barrier. And I'm pretty sure he grew a lot that day. That the boy in him was left behind with a man that was emerging. Because now he learned about endurance, he learned about challenges, he learned about overcoming challenges, he learned to get through it. An important step in becoming an adult. Because life's going to throw you challenges. Well, something died that day, but something was born as well. It wasn't quite a woman becoming a mom, but it was a boy becoming a man. When the Christian embraces the death of Jesus that we love and his resurrection, this mysterious new life, when the Christian embraces that, we become something different. We move from a curious seeker to an energized believer. My friends, this is the gift of Jesus to us. Tear down his body, it'll be rebuilt in 3 days. The very heart of the faith, the death and the resurrection of Jesus. For not only is he reborn, but so are we. Thanks be to God. Our next hymn is the hymn, Lord Jesus, Think on Me.